The billionaire Richard Cole froze in front of his massive 85-inch screen. The security footage played in slow motion before his disbelieving eyes. His twins, Eli and Ella, barely 5 years old, were not alone in their playroom as he thought. There, in the corner of the screen, stood Maria, the maid he had trusted like family. But what Richard saw next made his heart slam violently in his chest. Maria wasn't just helping the twins with their toys. She was talking to them like their mother. Her hand gently brushed through Ella's curls. She called Eli my son. Then she whispered something that made Richard's blood run cold. "Don't worry, my babies," she said softly. "Mama's here now. Soon we'll be together again, just like before." Richard's breath caught. Mama? What did she mean by that? He hit pause, rewinded, played it again. The words didn't change. Maria's tone didn't waver. Panic surged through him. He switched to another camera feed. The live footage showed Maria lifting the twins onto her lap, singing softly in Yoruba, songs his late wife Angela used to sing, songs he hadn't heard in years. His trembling hand reached for the phone. Security locked the doors. "Now!" he barked. But before they could respond, Maria turned suddenly toward the camera, directly toward it, as if she knew he was watching. Her lips curved into a chilling smile. Then she whispered, almost like a secret confession, "You shouldn't have left them alone, Richard." Richard stumbled backward. "Call the police," he yelled. "Now!" The command echoed through his mansion as alarms began to blare. Security lights flashed red across the walls. The guards sprinted through the hallways. But by the time they reached the twins' playroom, Maria and the children were gone. The room was empty, the window wide open. The breeze carried the faint echo of Maria's lullaby down the long marble corridors. Hours earlier, that same morning, Richard had been standing in his glass-walled office overlooking Victoria Island, Lagos. He was a man who had everything: a fleet of cars, 3 companies under his name, and a mansion worth $50 million. But he was also a man broken by grief. His wife's death in a car crash 3 years ago had left him hollow. The twins were all he had left. Since Angela's death, Maria had been his saving grace. She came highly recommended from a close friend. Quiet, hard-working, gentle with the children, never complained, never questioned orders. She was the kind of maid who blended into background but made the home feel alive again. So why had she called his children my babies? Richard's security chief, Cunnell, stepped into the office. "Sir, police are on the way. We've sealed the gates." No sign of Maria or the kids yet. Richard gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles white. "Find them, Cunnell. Find my children." 3 months ago, Richard had installed cameras throughout the mansion. Not because he suspected anyone, but because his twins had begun talking about a woman who visited them at night. At first, he thought it was grief. Kids their age could imagine things easily. But when Eli described a woman's face, the scar under her chin, the golden earring shaped like a star, Richard's world began to crumble. That scar belonged to Maria. He dismissed it at the time, convincing himself that it was just coincidence. Until last night, when he woke up to the twins' laughter echoing through the hallway at 2 a.m. and found their beds empty. The next morning, he reviewed the footage. That's when he saw it all. The songs, the words, the smile. "Sir." Cunnell's voice snapped him back. "We found her phone. It was left on the children's bed." Richard grabbed the device, shaking. The wallpaper made him drop it instantly. It was a photo of Angela, his late wife, holding 2 newborn babies. And right behind her, smiling faintly in the hospital uniform, was Maria. The room went silent. How did she get this?" Richard stammered. Cunnell swallowed hard. "Sir, this picture wasn't in any of our archives. It's not online either." A dread settled deep in Richard's gut. He opened the photo again, zooming in. That's when he saw it. The hospital logo on Maria's uniform. Lifeline Maternity Center. Angela had delivered the twins there. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "Check that hospital. Now!" Outside, sirens wailed as police cruisers pulled up the driveway. Officers fanned out through the mansion grounds. Reporters began gathering by the gates, drawn by the chaos at the billionaire's residence. Richard stared blankly at the screen, watching the playback one last time. Maria, rocking his twins, looked straight into the camera again. Her lips moved, forming silent words. He rewound and played it in slow motion, reading her lips carefully. What she mouthed made his stomach twist. They were mine before they were yours. The footage cut to static. Richard's phone rang. It was the hospital. The nurse on duty sounded nervous. "Mr. Cole, there's something you need to know about your twins' birth records." "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice cold. The nurse hesitated. "Sir, your wife didn't deliver twins that night. She delivered triplets." Richard's blood turned to ice. Richard didn't feel the leather of the car seat beneath him as Connell drove through Lagos traffic with sirens clearing a path. The nurse's words wouldn't stop ringing. Triplets. He had spent 5 birthdays singing to 2 children, buying 2 cakes, framing 2 school photos. How could there have been a third? Lifeline Maternity Center rose ahead, a white building with fading blue letters and a high fence crowded by street vendors. Police officers secured the entrance as Richard stepped out, his chest tight, his mind dragging him back to the night Angela died. She had left their home smiling, clutching a small hospital bag, promising to send a photo after delivery. The accident, then the emergency delivery, then a chapel full of candles and condolences. He remembered names spoken like anchors. Dr. Mensah, Matron Iridi, a young nurse who kept bringing water and blankets, eyes wet but steady. Maria? He couldn't place her here, yet her face in that photo sat in his hands like a verdict. Inside, the corridor smelled of antiseptic and old paint. Matron Iridi met them in a crisp uniform, her expression respectful but guarded. "Mr. Cole, officer, we pulled the records you requested." They entered a small office with barred windows. A folder lay open, thin, too thin for something that should have chronicled the biggest night of his life. The matron slid a printed page forward. "Patient, Angela Cole. Emergency C-section. Neonates labeled Cole. 01 Cole 02. She paused. "And Cole 03. Richard felt his throat close. "Where's Cole 03? Matron Iridi's eyes flicked to the officers, then back. According to this entry, baby 3 had breathing difficulties. Transferred to the neonatal unit for observation. Her voice slowed. There's a second note, signed out by the attending nurse during a power fluctuation. It says the baby was taken for further assessment, but the destination field is blank. Who signed the note? Connell asked, pen poised above his notebook. The matron turned the page. A neat signature sat on the line. M. Duke. Connell frowned. A Duke? The matron exhaled. Maria Duke. She was a junior nurse on night shift then. A cold, metallic taste filled Richard's mouth. You kept her on staff after this? She didn't stay, the matron said softly. She resigned 2 days later. We searched for her, but she had no forwarding address. And Mr. Cole, she tapped a final page. Weeks later, a different doctor filed an amendment. Cole, 03 deceased. There is no body record, no burial authorization. The certificate was issued but never collected. Richard stared at the paper until the letters blurred. Somewhere down the hall, a newborn cried, thin and furious, alive in a way that mocked the silence between lines of ink. Show me the neonatal unit, he said. They walked. In the glass-walled room, machines hummed around tiny incubators. Matron Iridi stood by a metal cabinet and unlocked it. Inside, old equipment manuals, a tin of disinfectant, and a weathered yellow ledger sat stacked. She placed a ledger on a counter and opened it to the date Angela delivered. Someone had pressed hard with a pen that night. The grooves were visible. He ran his finger over the column. Cole, 01 stable. Cole, 02 stable. Cole, 03. O2 support. 218 transferred. The next line had been erased, then written over in different ink. Destination, Ward B. But Ward B was on a separate floor. Why would a struggling newborn go there? An officer jogged in holding a clear evidence bag. Inside lay a small key and a laminated badge. Maria Aduk Neonatal. The officer nodded toward a storage door Richard had walked past on his way in. We found a locker behind a false panel. They pried the panel open. A small locker door stood behind it. The keyhole rusted but intact. The key fit. Inside, a folded hospital smock, an old phone without a SIM, and a sealed envelope addressed in careful cursive. From Mr. Cole. Richard didn't breathe as he broke the seal. If you find this, it means I ran out of time. On the night your wife delivered, the power went out twice. The generator failed once. The doctor told us to move baby 3 to Ward B temporarily while they fixed the ventilator. I carried him. When I returned for him 20 minutes later, he was gone, and the doctor told me not to ask questions. I reported it to matron. The next day, I was reassigned. I couldn't forget the sound he made when he gripped my finger. I looked for him. I lost my job for asking too much. Years passed. Then a friend from an agency placed me in your house. When I saw the twins, I knew immediately they had his eyes. I stayed to protect them while I kept searching for their brother. Please understand, I never meant to hurt you, but I cannot leave the other child behind. Tonight, I will try to bring them together. Maria, the note trembled in Richard's hands. A chair scraped the floor. Connell had to sit. Sir, he said, voice low, this is not a simple kidnapping. She believes she is fixing something. Richard felt anger and relief and terror tangle into a single tight knot. His grief for Angela, his guilt for not catching the truth earlier, the raw fear of what might happen to Eli and Ella. Everything collided. Where would she go? Matron Irede looked stricken. If she suspected an internal cover-up, she would avoid official places. Maybe a church clinic. An old wing. Somewhere quiet where a nurse she trusted could hide a baby. Richard pulled out his phone. His home app pinged with a motion alert. A new video tile blinked. Unknown device, camera 12. He tapped it. Grainy footage filled the screen. A rusted gate painted over a fading emblem. Lifeline Community Clinic. The defunct Outreach Center Lifeline had closed years ago near the lagoon. A narrow courtyard lay beyond, lit by a single swinging bulb. The camera angle shifted, as if attached to a moving cap. A familiar profile stepped into view. Maria, hair pulled back, face drawn with resolve. Eli clung to her left hand. Ella clutched a small stuffed rabbit in her right. Maria looked straight into the lens, into him. Richard, she whispered. Wind threads catching the microphone. Don't bring the police inside. If you love them, come alone. The audio crackled. Then another sound leaked through. A child's laugh from deeper in the courtyard, high and musical, and so achingly familiar that Richard's knees almost gave way. Maria turned, voice breaking into a whisper the camera barely caught. Say hello to your brother. The feed cut to black. If you're invested in this story, help more people find it. Like, subscribe, and share. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And one more thing. If you were Richard and saw that footage, would you go in alone or call the police inside anyway? Have you ever seen something like this happen? Richard parked 2 streets from the lagoon and killed the engine. Wind ruffled palm fronds above the shuttered storefronts as the last of the traffic hissed by. The defunct Lifeline Community Clinic crouched in the shadows ahead. Peeling paint, a rusted gate, and a porch light that flickered like a tire heartbeat. He slipped his phone into airplane mode and handed a second device to Connell. 10 minutes, he said. If I'm not out, bring the police to the door. Not before. Connell's jaw tightened. Understood. I'll keep them 2 blocks back, unmarked. Sir, he hesitated. If we're dealing with people who move in newborn, they won't think like thieves. They'll think like officials. I know, Richard said and started walking. The gate gave with a metallic cough. Inside, the courtyard smelled of rain and salt. A string bulb swung over cracked tiles, throwing thin light across a row of dusty benches. Somewhere beyond the corridor, a generator chugged across rhythm, and under it, a woman's voice low and steady, carrying a melody he knew too well. Orin me, Omo me. He followed the sound down a passage with faded posters. Wash hands, vaccinate, love your neighbor. The door at the end was propped with a brick. Richard pushed it and stepped into a small ward. Maria stood by a bed, eyes rimmed red but unflinching. Ella clung to her skirt. Eli peeked from behind a cabinet stacked with old files. Both children stared at Richard like they had been holding their breath since morning. He went to his knees, so fast his vision blurred. "Daddy," Ella whispered, and his throat loosened at the sound of it. She flew into his arms. Eli followed, face buried against Richard's shoulder. For a full 5 seconds the world was only their small warm shapes and the steady beat returning to his chest. "I told you he'd come," Maria said quietly. Richard rose, shielding the twins with one arm. "Where's the child?" The words broke on the last syllable. He hated that Maria heard it. She motioned toward the far bed, the one by the shuttered window. A portable oxygen tank stood beside it, a thin line snaking under a blanket edged in hospital blue. Richard moved closer. A boy lay sleeping, cheeks round with the softness of 5 years, lashes long over eyes he couldn't yet see. Even in sleep, his mouth carried the exact tilt as Eli's. On his wrist, a plastic band hung loose. Someone had cut it and tied it back together. "He was brought here 3 weeks after your wife delivered," Maria said. A woman who'd worked at Lifeline's outreach program paid Mama Saad. She used to run this ward before it closed to keep the child safe until someone came with papers. No one came, so she hid him, feeding him from donations. When she fell ill last year, she told me everything. "How did you find him?" Richard asked, voice low. "I kept the old night logs," she said. "Every erasure, every false transfer. When Lifeline posted an auction notice for equipment, I checked the lot list. This oxygen unit," she tapped the tank, "was signed out to the outreach ward after it was decommissioned. But the gauge readings were fresh. Someone was still changing the cylinders. I followed the supplier." Richard stared at the boy's wristband. A smear of faded ink showed a number ending in 03. He lifted it gently. Under the knot, where the plastic had been cut, a tiny sticker was pressed flat, scuffed but legible, Ward B, NICU. Something old and cold pressed into his spine. "What have they told him his name is?" Richard asked. "Here, they call him Little Man," Maria said, trying and failing to smile. "Mama Saad wrote Noah in her notes. She thought you might have, like, biblical names. But I didn't tell him anything. I wanted you to see him first and tell him who he is." "Noah." Richard's lips shaped the syllables and heard his own father's voice somewhere far away, over a different sea. He reached out, hand hovering above the boy's shoulder. At his touch, the child's eyes fluttered. They opened slowly, dark brown, clear as river stones, and fixed on Richard's face with a calm Richard had only seen once before. The first time he looked down into the incubators at Eli and Ella. "Hey," Richard whispered. "Hey there." The boy blinked, then lifted a hand with surprising certainty and set his palm against Richard's cheek. The room shrank to the size of that touch. Ella squeezed closer. Eli's fingers threaded through Richard's free hand. Maria stood very still, as if afraid to break the moment. Beyond the thin walls, the generator coughed and caught again. "We have to move," Maria said at last, voice barely above the hum. "The people who did this, their power came from quiet corridors and sign papers. They don't like threads pulled." Richard tore his gaze away from the boy and looked at her. "You should have told me. Months ago." She nodded once. "I thought I could finish it alone. I was wrong." He studied her face, the same face he had stared at on his screen, terrified and furious. And then the note in his pocket. "Please understand, I never meant to hurt you." There were 1,000 arguments circling his tongue, but he swallowed them. "We leave together," he said. "Now, no police inside, no noise." Maria exhaled like she'd been holding that breath since the night Angela delivered. I set up a back exit. Mama Sada's wheelchair ramp leads to the alley. If we keep left, there's a fence that opens near the water. Richard turned, cradled the boy, and felt the lightness and heat of him, the way a sleeping child molds to a body that promises to carry him. He nodded to the twins. "Stay by my side." "No running." They moved. The corridor seemed narrower, the posters more watchful. At the courtyard, the bulb had stilled, no longer swinging. Richard shifted the boy higher and stepped toward the ramp. A shadow detached from the gate and resolved into a man, in a faded clinic coat, holding a folder against his chest like a trophy. He was tall, lean, with graying hair and an expression that had been iron-free of surprise long ago. "Mr. Cole," he said, as if greeting a boardroom guest. "I am Dr. Mensah. We have paperwork to complete." Richard's grip tightened. "You have nothing?" Mensah smiled without warmth. "On the contrary, Ward B's transfer logs, burial authorization, issued, if you recall, and a family court order dated this morning assigning temporary custodial review to Lifeline until the custody status of the minors can be clarified." He lifted the folder and tapped it. "Children cannot leave this clinic." Maria stepped forward. "You can't keep papers that contradict each other and call it law." "Law," Mensah said, "is signatures and time stamps. Both are on my side." Movement flickered at the street. Unmarked cars aligning just beyond the corner. Cunnell's signal time had not yet elapsed. Richard's 10 minutes had not yet died. But a white pickup had also rolled to a stop across the lane. 2 men in private security uniforms climbed down. No insignia, no badges. "Back inside," Richard said quietly, shifting his body to shield the children. Mensah's smile grew thinner. He raised a hand, and the men at the pickup produced a plastic transport crib from the truck bed, the kind used to move infants between wards. One of them snapped a strap loose and held it up so the fabric hung like a threat. "Mr. Cole," Mensah said, his voice as smooth as anesthetic, "if you refuse, I will enforce the order. The police you call will assist me. They already have a copy." Richard felt the boy stir in his arms. Noah's breath hitched, the tube tugging lightly at his cheek. Maria's gaze flicked the oxygen gauge. It had dipped into yellow. The twin squeezed his hands and waist, silently asking the one question he had no safe answer for. From Richard's pocket, the spare phone buzzed once. The prearranged code Cunnell would use if something changed outside. Richard didn't look. He kept his eyes on Mensah and took a single step back toward the clinic door. The courtyard bulb went out, a red that appeared on Richard's shirt, heart high. "Mr. Cole," Mensah said softly, "don't make this difficult." The gate behind him yawned wide, and new shadows poured through. The courtyard bulb popped and died. Darkness pressed in, broken only by street glow and the thin red on Richard's chest. He tightened his hold on the sleeping boy and angled his body to cover Eli and Ella. "Lower the sight," Richard said, steady but low. "There are children here." A second danced onto Dr. Mensah's lapel and held there. From the lane, Cunnell's voice slid in like a blade wrapped in cloth. "You first, Doctor." Mensah didn't flinch. "Officer Cunnell," he replied dry. "Always late, always loud. Always watching," Cunnell said. Shapes shifted at the street mouth. 3 plainclothes officers with their hands open, palms forward. Nobody fires. Cameras on. One of the men lifted a phone. Its small light glowed. A public witness no one had invited, but everyone felt. Richard breathed once. Slow. "We're leaving," he told Mensah. "All of us." Mensah tapped his folder. "The order forbids it." Maria stepped in, chin high. "Your order was signed on a public holiday, Doctor. Courts were closed." "Emergencies make exceptions," Mensah said. "Children deserve structure, not a billionaire's panic." "Structure?" Richard's voice scraped raw. "You erase my son." Something in Mensah's eyes iced over. "You have twins," he said softly. "What a blessing. But grief makes men greedy. 3 is a heavy number." The words were so calm, they almost hid the knife in them. Eli's fingers locked around Richard's. Ella's breath trembled against his coat. From inside the ward, a soft tick, tick. The oxygen gauge sank another notch. Maria's head snapped toward it. "We need a cylinder now." Mensah tilted his head, as if considering whether. "You may have one when custody is determined." Cunnell took a step. "Doctor, that boy will not be leveraged for paperwork." A door creaked at the far side of the courtyard. An elderly woman in a headscarf, thin and fierce, hobbled out pushing a dented trolley with 2 green cylinders strapped down by old belts. Her jaw was set. "In this yard, we breathe first, argue after," she said, voice like sand. "I am Sod. You will move aside. Mensa's face tightened. Mama saw this facility is closed. She parked the trolley between Richard and the private guards and stared at each man until they looked away. Babies don't close. Her hand shook as she unlatched the cylinder. Nurse Aduk hold the child. Maria was already there, fingers quick and sure as she swapped lines. Richard felt the boy's breathing even out against his chest. Something inside him unclenched. "Colonel," Richard said, eyes still on Mensa, "call Judge Canny." Colonel's phone was already dialing. He held it up, speaker on. A tired baritone answered. "This had better be about the order you shoved under my door." "It's fraudulent, my lord," Colonel said. "Signed on a day your chambers were shuttered. The applicant is the same physician under inquiry for irregular transfer logs." "Put Mr. Cole on," the judge cut in. Richard swallowed. "Sir, this is my son. He was recorded born and recorded dead on the same night. There is no body record. I have his band. I have the nurse who carried him. Please." Silence. Then paper rustling, a chair scraping. "Dr. Mensa," the judge said, voice now clear and amplified by rage. "You are on this call?" "I am," Mensa replied. "I am issuing an oral stay on your temporary order pending review," the judge said. "You will not move any child tonight. If a hand is laid on them, it will be contempt. Officer Colonel, take names." A hiss ran through Mensa's teeth. So quick it might have been the breeze. He lowered his hand, and the guards eased a fraction. Then a small sound floated from the street. Tires whispering over water-slick tar, and all at once Mama Sada's eyes cut to the lane. "Back!" she said sharply. "All of you." A white pickup, the same, rolled forward an inch, just enough to clear its line of sight. A man in the cab lifted a radio. Mensa didn't look at him. He watched Richard. "You think a phone call is a wall," he said. "But phones are paper, too. They burn." Maria crouched by the twins. "We're going to the ramp now." She touched Eli's shoulder, nodded once at Ella, and looked up at Richard. "Left of the alley. I'll take point." He shifted the boy, Noah, and moved. Colonel matched pace on the flank, body angle to block. The courtyard felt longer than it had 5 minutes ago, the exit weaker. The pickup idled. Mensa stood very still, folder tucked under his arm like a blade under a jacket. At the gate, the night opened to the alley and the lagoon's dark mirror beyond. The ramp was a pale tongue against the shadow. "Slow," Maria said. "Watch your feet." They made the turn, and two figures stepped from the darkness, not in clinic coats or private uniforms, but in black suits with lapel pins that winked under the streetlight. Official, federal. The taller one held up a badge too fast to read. "Federal Child Protection," he said. "We have jurisdiction." Colonel didn't break stride. "You have timing." The man's jaw twitched. "Sir, you will hand the child to the custody crib." Richard stopped, pulse banging. On whose authority? The man's gaze slid past him, toward the road. Headlights bloomed, washed out, then settled as a black SUV eased to the curb. The back door opened. A woman stepped out. For a second the night and the city and the arguments vanished. Richard's knees went loose. The woman's face caught the street lamp, and the shape of it, forehead, cheekbones, the tired, stubborn mouth, hit him like surf. "Angela?" Richard breathed. Eli squeezed his hand so hard it hurt. Ella's small gasp made a sound he had heard in the church when names were read. Maria's fingers closed around the railing. Even Colonel swore under his breath. The woman paused, as if bracing against the wind only she could feel. She walked forward, steady, eyes never leaving Richard's face. Up close, he saw the differences. Finer lines at the eyes, a faint scar at the temple he didn't remember, a breath catch in the right shoulder. But the voice, when it came, was a key turning in a door he had boarded up 3 years ago. "Richard," she said softly, "don't let them take the children." Mensa's calm broke for the first time. "Mrs. Cole," he snapped, "you were advised to remain in the vehicle." She didn't look at him. Her gaze slid to the boy in Richard's arms, and something shattered and remade itself in her face. "Noah," she whispered, and tears rose clean and fast. Baby, I am so sorry. The federal agent lifted the badge again, words too smooth. Sir, ma'am, emotions are high. Please place the child in the crib so we can... Angela, or the ghost of her, cut him off without turning. Richard, listen to me, she said, voice shaking. The crash was an accident. Warby wasn't a mistake. And if you put him in that crib, you won't see any of them again. Behind them, the pickup's driver lifted his radio. On the lagoon, a small light bobbed and winked out. Somewhere far off, a siren wound up and died. Richard looked from the badge to Mensa, to the woman, who wore his wife's face. The boy in his arms stirred and opened his eyes. They were Angela's eyes, twice over and all at once. He took a breath that felt like fire. Who are you? He asked. The woman swallowed, shook and met his stare. I'm Angela, she said, and I can prove it. The federal agent reached for the crib strap. If you're gripped by this story, help it reach more people. Like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And tell me this. Facing a badge and a folder like Richard is now, would you hand the child over or run? Have you ever seen anything like this unfold in real life? The badge hovered inches from Richard's hands. He didn't move. The woman who looked like Angela stood between him and the transport crib, eyes locked on his. Wind off the lagoon pressed the night flat against their skin. Prove it, Richard said, voice low. Now. She nodded once. On our wedding day, the generator failed at the reception, and your Uncle Bayo sang until the lights came back. You cried in the hallway so no one would see. You said we'd never let a machine decide our joy. Her mouth trembled. When the twins kicked at 7 months, you called them Drum and Bell. Eli was Drum. Ella was Bell. And... She lifted her left wrist, revealing a pale scar like a crescent. You cut me opening a coconut the week we moved to Victoria Island. You said the scar looked like a moon you could hold. You kissed it and said, when we get lost, we meet at the moon. The words hit a door inside Richard that no one had opened in 3 years. His chest lurched. Angela, he whispered. Cunnell took half a step forward. Phone still up? Hold. He said, quiet to the suited man. To the woman, ma'am, where have you been? Hidden, she said, not taking her eyes off Richard. I woke up after the crash in a clinic that wasn't on any map. Warby wasn't made for babies. It was made to make them disappear. They told me Noah died. I signed papers I couldn't see straight. When I asked again, they moved me. A woman from inside helped me get out last month. I came straight here when Maria sent word that the twins were in danger. Mensa's voice snapped the glass of the moment. A pretty tale, he said. But Mrs. Cole was buried with honors. Obituaries ran. Her husband signed. I signed a certificate. Richard shot back, the old fury sparking. For a body I never saw, because you told me I was too distraught. The taller federal agent shifted, impatience leaking into his stance. Emotions aside, custody procedures. Cunnell raised a hand. Which division did you say again? Federal Child Protection. The man replied. Cunnell's lips turned wry. We don't have one by that name. His screen lit his face as he dialed. Command, confirm. Any federal deployment to Lifeline Community Clinic? Any units with badges reading FCP? He listened, gaze fixed on a man's throat rather than his face. Then, copy. He put the phone down slowly. Stand down, gentlemen. No such team exists. And those serials on your badges are printed, not engraved. The shorter agent's jaw clenched. That line won't work on a crowd, he muttered. No crowd here, Cunnell said. Just names that turn into charges. His 3 plainclothes stepped closer, hands still open, palms visible. Mensa's calm returned like a mask. He didn't look at the agents. He looked at Angela. You should have stayed dead, he said, soft enough that only the front row heard. Maria moved to the twins, crouching so her face was level with theirs. Remember the ramp, she whispered. We keep left, we hold hands. Mama Sod tugged the oxygen trolley closer and thumped the tank with a knuckle. Full, she said. Go. Cunnell, Richard said, shifting Noah against his chest. Seal the street if you can. We're taking the alley to the lagoon. Cunnel nodded. 2 minutes. They moved as one body. Richard with Noah, Angela and Maria flanking the twins, Cunnel and 2 officers forming a loose shield. The imposter agents adjusted a beat too late. Mensa didn't move at all. At the ramp, Angela's breath hitched. This incline, she murmured. I dreamed it every night. Down, Maria said gently. They had nearly reached the alley when the dry thrum of a diesel engine rolled in from the street. Headlights flared. An ambulance nosed into view, white with a Lifeline logo in blue. It stopped broadside, blocking the narrow exit. Doors flew open with professional haste. Make way, called the driver, hopping down. He wore a Lifeline jumpsuit, hair tucked under a cap. His face struck Richard like a slap. Deo, Richard said. Deo turned, smile tight and bright. He was one of Richard's own night shift security supervisors, the man who had stood at the mansion gate for years, who had given Eli high fives and taught Ella the names of birds. Sir, he said smoothly, voice pitched for calm. Let's get the little one on proper oxygen. The roads are hot. We'll take you all to a safe facility. Cunnel's eyes narrowed. When did you join Lifeline, Deo? Second job. Deo said easily. Times are hard. He waved the empty rear of the ambulance, where a crib sat strapped and ready. Please, he needs this. Maria glanced at the gauge, still full. He has oxygen, she said. Deo's smile didn't change. And will you carry the cylinder to the mainland, nurse? Let us help. Angela stepped closer, positioning herself between the ambulance and the children. Who gave you this route, Deo? Ma'am, please, Deo said, and in the politeness was something cold. Let's do our work. Movement by the driver's door. The shorter imposter agent had drifted toward the cab, hands casual, posture wrong. Cunnel shifted to cut him off. Richard felt Eli's fingers loosen from his own. He looked down and saw, with a jolt that sent heat up his spine, that Eli had stepped forward, just one step, eyes wide, shoulders angled toward the ambulance. Uncle Deo? Eli said, small voice aching with recognition. You came. Deo opened his arms like a coach at the finish line. Omo me, I'm here, he said warmly. He bent, and in that bend was the movement of a man who had practiced scooping children, so they laughed instead of flinched. Let's help your brother breathe. Richard shifted Noah and reached for Eli, but the boy, trusting the grooves of his life, took another step. Deo's hand shot out, fast as a striking kite, and caught Eli's wrist. Maria moved first, quicker than thought, fingers locking on Deo's sleeve. Angela lunged for Eli's other arm. The alley compressed to a knot of hands and elbows and breath. Let go, Cunnel barked, voice knife sharp. Deo's smile vanished. Now, he hissed. The ambulance's side door slammed from within. A second man, hidden until then, sprang out from the rear and grabbed for Ella. Angela pivoted, wrenching the girl back, so hard she felt her knees on the concrete, taking Ella down with her and curling her body to shield. Noah stirred, oxygen line tugging. The imposter agent at the cab reached for his belt. Cunnel's palm cracked his wrist away. Everything sped up. Mama Saad swung a metal wrench and smashed the ambulance's headlamp. Glass sprayed like hot rain. Maria twisted Deo's sleeve and drove her shoulder into his chest. His grip faltered. Eli slipped free and ran straight to Richard, burying his face against the oxygen tank. The second man lunged again, caught only air as Angela rolled, pulling Ella under her. On the street, sirens, real ones, flared to life, lights washing the alley in red and blue. Deo saw it and changed tactics in a blink. He pivoted from the children and dove for the ambulance's dashboard, slapping a switch. Behind Richard, inside the clinic, a faint clicking began, soft, multiplied, growing into a skittering chorus. Angela's head whipped toward the corridor. What is that? Maria's face drained. Sprinklers, she said. Then, horror chasing the word. No! Accelerant! The courtyard bloomed orange at the edges. A fast, hungry light. Flames licked up the old posters, raced along the cracked ceiling. Found the oxygen line they'd just left coiled by the bed. Heat rolled like a hand across the back of Richard's neck. Mensa didn't flinch. He watched the fire begin to eat the record's wing, his folder tucked safe under his arm, the smallest curve of satisfaction lifting one corner of his mouth. Evidence, he murmured. Always so fragile. Richard turned, lungs seizing. Not from smoke, not yet, but from a sudden understanding that the past itself was about to be burned clean. He looked at Angela, at Maria, at Connell sprinting toward the ambulance controls, at his children's faces lit by the first fingers of flame. Then something hard and fast slammed into his shoulder like a hammer. The world tilted. Noah slid, the oxygen line yanking away. The boy's eyes opened wide as the air vanished. His small chest stopped moving. The hit spun Richard sideways. Pain tore through his shoulder, hot and electric. His grip loosened, and the oxygen line snapped from the boy's cheek with a hiss. Noah! Angela's cry cut the smoke. Maria was already moving. She caught Noah before he slid, palm steady beneath his neck. Mask, she said, voice level. Bag. Connell wrenched open the ambulance's rear, ripped an amber bag from his hook, and tossed it. Maria sealed a pediatric mask over Noah's mouth and squeezed, 1, 2, watching his chest. Nothing. She tilted his chin, pinched lightly, bagged again. The tiny ribs lifted. Fell, lifted. Breath is back, she said, not looking up. Keep the line clear. Heat rolled from the clinic as fire raced along the ceiling, licking old paint and brittle posters. In the courtyard, a sprinkler head burst and spat not water but a thin, chemical mist that fed the flames like dry wind. Mama Saad slammed a wrench onto a rusted valve and cranked. Somewhere in the walls, a main line groaned shut. The hiss in the corridor dulled. You won't burn my ward for paper, she rasped. Deo lunged for the ambo bag. Connell met him mid-stride and drove him into the ambulance door. The shorter fake agent swung wide for Connell's head. A plainclothes officer blocked and twisted, dropping him hard to the concrete. The taller one reached for his belt again, saw 2 real patrol cars scream around the corner, and thought better. He raised his hands. Mensa did not move. He watched Maria's rhythm on the bag, watched the fire bite to the record's wing, watched Richard straighten with blood running hot down his sleeve, and let the smallest smile crease his mouth. Angela slid to Richard's uninjured side, pressed her scarf to the wound. Through and through, she said, breath fast but hand strong. Muscle, not bone. You can carry. I will, he said, and believed it because there was no world in which he would not. Eli and Ella clung to his coat, faces smoky and wet. Stay with Maria, Richard told them, forcing calm into his voice. Hold the trolley. Sirens converged at the mouth of the lane. The ambulance's driver, pinned by an officer, stopped fighting. Deo bucked once more, lost air to Connell's forearm, and sagged. Doctor, Connell called across the heat, you are under arrest for attempted arson and obstruction. Mensa lifted the folder an inch, as if to admire its edges. Arrest me, he said mildly. The building burns either way. Not tonight, Maria said. She slipped the ambo bag strap over her own shoulder, clipped the oxygen line into a fresh cannula, and secured it to Noah's cheek with tape torn by her teeth. The little chest rose, steadied. Color crept back. Move, she added. They fell into formation, Richard with Noah tight to his chest, Angela and Maria flanking the twins, Connell and 2 officers boxing the rear. Mama Saad pushed the cylinder like a stubborn donkey through sand. At the ramp, the night opened a lagoon, black water flexing under streetlight. The first lick of fire touched the clinic's doorframe behind them and snapped to life with a hungry cough. They hit the alley. Cool air cut the smoke. The first patrol unit, fishtailed to block the lane. Captain Canham, broad-shouldered, unimpressed by men who were behind papers, stepped out, eyes taking everything in at once. Medical first, she said, jerking a thumb at a clean ambulance she had held 2 blocks back. My crew only. No lifeline vehicles. Her medic sprang toward Noah. Maria shook her head once, not letting go of the bag. We ride with him, she said. No detachments. Canham held her gaze. Done. Hold them, Connell told her, nodding toward Deo and the imposters. And him. He meant Mensa. For the first time, Mensa looked bothered. He turned his face slightly from the dash cams and street phones that now stared at him like 1,000 small juries. "Captain," he said smoothly, "you're interfering with federal—" "There is no federal unit here," Canham said without looking at him. "And arson is very local." She flicked her fingers. 2 officers boxed him in. Richard put one knee on the ambulance step and stopped. He looked back down the scorched corridor at orange teeth eating the roof. He remembered a photo in a locker from Mr. Cole. He remembered a yellow ledger, grooves pressed deep. He remembered a night 3 years ago when a generator failed and a man with a soft voice wrote a lie. "The records," he said, throat tight, "they'll burn." Maria's hand touched his wrist. In her palm sat a coin-sized plastic disc, scuffed in gray. "They won't," she said softly. "I sewed a pin camera in my apron when I came back to clean this ward last month. It's been streaming to a cloud backup since this evening. Transfer logs, faces, the order seal. If the paper dies, the picture lives." She lifted her chin toward Mensa, waved to the moon. "The moon?" Richard asked, dazed. She smiled, small and tired. "You told your children the moon is where you meet when you're lost. I gave the folder that name. Moon. It's already with your lawyer." Angela let out a breath that sounded like it had been in her for years. "Thank you," she whispered. For a second, the world was all the small brave things it still held. An old woman's wrench, a nurse's bag breath, a captain's simple order. Then a popping crack rang out from the courtyard, sharp, metallic, wrong. "Down!" Cunnel barked. A bullet chewed the curb by the patrol car's tire. Another smashed a mirror above Richard's head. Canham grabbed the radio. "Shooter, southwest wall." Mensa's face flickered. Something ugly stirred behind the comm. And then, with a move too quick for a man his age, he twisted from the officer's reach and dove for the lane. He didn't run toward the street. He ran toward the lagoon. Beyond the alley, a low boat idled near silent, its outboard a whisper. A shadow stood in it, holding a pistol like a pointer. Mensa sprinted, folder under his arm, as if the water itself had written him an invitation. "Stay with the boy," Angela shouted. She vaulted off the curb and went after him. "Angela!" Richard's voice broke. He took a step, stopped, Noah heavy and breathing. The twins at his knees, the world demanding 2 impossible choices at once. Angela cleared the last pile of broken crate and hit the quay. Mensa leapt and caught the boat's gunwale. Angela grabbed the back of his coat. For a heartbeat they hung above black water, his weight her grip, paper suspended between them. Mensa twisted viciously. The folder tore. Half of it tumbled into Angela's free hand. The other half, thicker, stamped, sealed, splashed into the lagoon and vanished. A single flash lit the quay. No gun, just light. And Angela flinched, her fingers spasming. Mensa fell into the boat. The shadow yanked the throttle. The hull skated away from the quay like a beetle on oil. Angela staggered, looked down at what she held. A sheaf of damp but legible photocopies in a small, taped envelope stuck to the back. She turned, and a second flash flared from the shadowed end of the quay. Maria's body jolted as if pulled by a wire. The ambu bag slipped from her hand. Noah's chest went still. Maria sagged to her knees, a dark stain blooming high on her side. She looked up at Richard, eyes clear and furious and impossibly gentle at once. "Don't let them," she managed and fell. The boat's motor rose to a whining scream and arrowed into the dark. Mensa hunched low with what remained of the truth under his arm. Cunnel dropped to a knee between the cars and sighted along the quay. "Shooter! Hands up!" he roared. Patrol beams washed the concrete. A figure tried to melt into shadow. 2 officers cut the angle and tackled him hard, the pistol skittering into the gutter with a metallic clack. Clear. Captain Canham called. "Medic to the nurse, now." Maria lay curled on her side, one hand still reaching for the ambu bag. Blood darkened her blouse high, along the ribs. A medic slid in, pressed gauze, and nodded to Richard. "Keep bagging the boy. Count with me." He pumped Maria's pulse as another team lifted her onto a board. Richard sealed a mask to Noah's face. 1, 2, 3. The little chest rose again. Angela held the oxygen line steady and stroked Noah's hair, voice a thread. Come back, my son. Breathe. On the lagoon, the fleeing boat darted for the bridge. A Canham keyed her radio. Marine police intercept under 5 cowries. White hull, 2 souls. 1 is armed. A reply snapped back. Copy. Netting channel now. Colonel wrenched Deo upright and cuffed him. You chose the wrong second job, he said. Deo's mouth worked. No words coming out. The shorter fake agent spat on the ground. You won't break it. Lifeline is bigger than. Captain Canham didn't raise her voice. Bigger than the law you try to bend into a cage? She pointed to the shooter pinned on the quay. He will talk first. Angela was pale but steady. She held out the water-swollen envelope she'd torn from the folder. There's more. Inside, wrapped in plastic, lay a slim metal key and an old SIM card taped to a note in a careful hand. Locker, Falomo Ferry, cameras, Ward B. If I vanish, this is yours. It was signed with 2 initials only, S.I. Mama Saad sagged with relief. She came back before she died, the old woman whispered. Sadai Reedy, my daughter. She worked under Mensa until she saw too much. Her chin lifted. We will finish her errand. Sirens bent toward the bridge. Over the lagoon, blue lights flickered across black water. The boat tried to cut into an unlit channel and ran straight into a rope line the Marine unit had drawn between pilings. It whipped around, stalled, and slewed helplessly. Officers poured light into the hull. A moment later, voices carried. Hands where we can see them. Down! Richard heard it and let out a breath he hadn't known was trapped. He looked at Angela, at the twins shaking but alive, at Noah's chest rising under the mask. He kept counting. 4, 5. Load, the medic said. They lifted Noah and Maria into Captain Canham's ambulance. Parents ride, the captain said. And you, she pointed at Maria even as the doors closed. You are not my suspect. You are my witness. They sped across the night city to Lagos Island General. In the trauma bay, lights were bright and faces were all business. A pediatric doctor slid a tube and secured it. A ventilator took over the rhythm Maria had started. Stable for now, he said. We'll move him to Piku. Your nurse's quick bagging saved minutes we could not buy. He looked at Richard's shoulder, at the blood seeping through Angela's scarf. You sit. Richard didn't. Not until a surgeon put a hand on his good arm. You can stand and be stitched, she said dryly, or fall and be carried. Choose. He sat. Before dawn, Marine police marched Mensa down a corridor in cuffs. Water traced salt lines on his trousers. A Canham walked beside him. We recovered your folder, she said. Plastic sleeves. Pages legible. Mensa's mouth made a straight, bloodless line. Judge Acani arrived with hair still wet and fury still hot. He listened to quick reports, read copies from the Moon folder Maria had already pushed to the cloud to Richard's lawyer, and signed orders with firm, thick stroke. Seize all Lifeline neonatal records, he said. Hold the board for questioning. Arrest Dr. Mensa for conspiracy, falsification, attempted arson, attempted child trafficking, and whatever else counsel can stack without the charge sheet falling over. By noon, DNA swabs matched like mirror halves. Angela's prints matched the old passport locked in a safe Richard hadn't had the heart to open in years. The death certificate the hospital had pressed on him 3 years earlier curled in a plastic tray as a forensic technician pointed out where the seal stamp didn't match the registrar's set. Someone stamped a photocopy, she said. They counted on grief to blur the edges. Reporters gathered outside the hospital gate, but a Canham kept them back with a blunt statement. An internal ring diverted infants using doctor forms. Tonight, 3 children remain with their parents. Our investigation continues. In the Piku, the world narrowed to a soft pump hush and a green line stepping up and down. Maria woke from surgery white-lipped but sharp-eyed. Her first words were not about herself. The boy, Breathing, Angela said, voice breaking into a smile. He's breathing. Richard slid his stitched arm carefully around Angela's shoulders. He stepped to Maria's bedside and set his hand over hers. You stayed, he said. When I could not see, you saw. Tears shone but did not fall. I didn't save him alone, she said. I only refused to stop. You are family, Richard said simply. If you want it, Noah's middle name will be a Duke. Maria shut her eyes once, opened them, nodded. Days later, under clear daylight, the courtroom filled. Mensa stood with a lawyer, whose suit couldn't hide the stench of the case. Deo and the fake agents flanked him, faces pinched. Mama Saad wore her cleanest wrapper and held her wrench in a tote like a talisman. Connell gave evidence without swagger. Captain Acanum read charge numbers like counting stones. The judge's gavel did not need to fall hard. The weight was in the record that had not burned. Video of signatures, timestamps, babies shifted like files. Mensa, at last cornered, spoke names that led to offices with polished floors. Warrants widened. Richard told the court what he'd seen on his own camera. A maid calling children my babies. Fear turning to fury, then to a plea. We installed cameras to protect what was ours, he said. They protected what was almost taken. When it was over, when custody orders were corrected and new birth certificates printed with 3 names instead of 2, when the hospital sign came down to be replaced by a different board under federal supervision, Richard carried Noah out into warm daylight. The ventilator was gone. A nasal cannula whispered at the boy's cheek, but his eyes were bright. At home, the twins ran ahead to a playroom scrubbed to fear. On the wall, an artist had painted a big round moon above the toy shelf. Eli stood beneath it. Drum, bell, and boat, he declared solemnly, and Ella giggled. Noah looked up at the moon and reached his palm toward it like he remembered something before memory. Friends gathered quietly that evening. There was no party. Only 3 candles and a bowl of jollof and a nurse in a sling who insisted on slicing plantain one-handed. Richard cleared his throat. For the first time since that night, he said, We are 5. Angela looked around at faces braided by fire and water and stubborn hope. We owe more than thanks, she said gently. Lifeline's walls held other cries. She touched the yellow ledger Maria had copied, now sealed in an evidence bag. 12 lines had been scratched and rewritten on that date, not 3. Richard nodded. We started a fund this morning, he said. The Moon Trust, to find every child those papers tried to erase, and keep any war from being a door that doesn't open. Noah tottered to Maria's chair and set his small hand on her bandaged side with grave care, as if listening. He looked up at her, then at Angela, and then at Richard. He opened his mouth, considered the room, and chose his word. Mama, he said, then pointed at Angela, and after a beat at Maria too. Silence settled like a blessing. It was not neat. It was not simple. It was true. Later, when the house breathed in sleep, Richard walked to the security wall. Camera 12 still faced the courtyard, but its default view had changed. It framed the moon the twins had painted, a pale, stubborn circle cut with 2 smiling craters. He almost turned it off, then didn't. He set a new label instead, and the system saved it with a soft click. Meeting place. Thank you for listening.